Hey gamers, welcome to Treantmonk's Temple. So we're on to our 7th level spells. So today let's talk about the best, the worst, the most overrated, the most underrated. Remember, we're talking about characters that are at least 13th level, and this will always be one of the top 3 spell slots they have, because you're never going to get a second 7th level slot, 8th level slot, or 9th level slot. So these spells really need to pack a punch, and some of them really do. Some of these spells are just going to win you fights and change campaigns and make it so that you can't die, double your actions, amazing things. And other things are just going to be so disappointing, you'll wonder if you're looking at a 3rd level spell. So, all that said, let's get started. So let's jump into our list with our worst spells at 7th level. Easy list to fill, unfortunately. Even though there's not very many 7th level spells, we have some bad ones, some stinkers. And the one that's 3rd on my list is Prismatic Spray. Now, Prismatic Spray might be fine if it was a low level spell, but as a 7th level spell, it just doesn't do what it needs to do. It has a lot that doesn't go for it. The first thing that doesn't go for it is the shape. So cones in general, if they have a chance of friendly fire, are a bad shape to have. They're hard to place in a map in a way that's going to hit lots of enemies and not hit any allies. So shape to begin with, not what we want. The second thing that comes up is that the effect is random. And this is not a good thing because you're talking about 8 different possible effects. 5 of them are damage, and they're all different kinds of damage. So you're at 13th level. What you're fighting probably has resistances and or immunities. And now you're just going to roll the dice and see if you hit those immunities, right? So you're fighting something that you know is immune to fire. You use Prismatic Spray. Now you have to just hope you don't do fire damage. And the other thing is if you don't do damage, because there's only 5 out of 8 results that do damage, one of the results is save or you're restrained, and then you get a save every round. And the other effect is save or you're blinded, or you get a save every round. 7th level spell, and we're doing save or blinded? That is not, and that's on a random effect. You can't even count on that. So you have these random effects, and they're all pretty ineffective. And you don't know what you're going to get, and no matter what you get, it's going to be disappointing. The next spell I'm going to pick for worst spells is Regenerate. So Regenerate makes my 2nd worst spell at 7th level. Regenerate is a healing spell, and the first thing it does is it does 48 plus 30 points of healing, which is just terrible healing at this level. 48 plus 30 healing, we're talking about an average of 48 points of healing. And we had heal last level for 70 hit points of healing. Okay. The advantage of this spell is then you start healing 1 hit point per round after that. So I guess that is maybe an out of combat healing spell that can give you all your hit points back. But like I said, we have heal is doing 70 hit points of healing. Our abilities to take rests and long rests. Do we really want to use a 7th level slot to recover a few hit points? That just seems like a terrible deal to me. Assuming we have the time to make 1 hit point per round count up to a lot of hit points, that is no good. And then I guess the final idea is that if you go into combat and you go down, then the next round you come up with 1 hit point. But the thing is at 13th level or higher, if you're coming up in combat with 1 hit point, that's not always a good thing. You can die very easily. You're often facing several attacks around. 1 hit point does not save the day for you. It's much better to have either a large recovery of hit points or a way to prevent the attacks from happening. Just the 1 hit point around, it's just not doing a lot for you tactically anymore. At low levels, that's 1 hit point around would be lovely, but at 13th level, it's just not cutting it. So I just can't recommend this spell. I think it's a poor spell for the level. So for our worst spell at 7th level, if every spell was as obviously bad as this, I wouldn't do videos because we'd all know. Because if you look at the spell Mordenkainen's Sword, it's so clearly terrible. So clearly just not anywhere near the other spells of this level that I don't understand how it got through the design process in the first place. It uses your action, it uses your concentration to create an effect that uses your bonus action every round to do 3d10 damage. Now, all you have to do to realize how terrible this is compare this to Spiritual Weapon that clerics got as a second level spell. A second level spell that doesn't use their concentration, that uses a bonus action to cast. And if they upcast it, it's just better than this spell. And it doesn't even scale all that well, but it at least scales better than this. So how this even became a spell at 7th level and got through playtesting, I'm not quite sure. But at least everyone knows this spell is terrible. It's an awful spell. Easy number one. Let's move on to some better spells. So let's talk about some best spells. And my third pick for best spell at 7th level is Plane Shift. Plane Shift is just such an amazing utility spell and combat spell and useful in so many situations, it needed to make my list. First off, if you're in combat and things are going rough, you can get out with your entire party. So Dimension Door, all those spells, you've now got a spell that gets everyone out. And you can go anywhere, right? You can go to another plane, you can go to the same plane, to anywhere that there's a teleportation circle. And it can bypass a lot of challenges that might otherwise be difficult for you. So all in all, this is a spell that has it on the utility front, it has it on the combat front. Oh, and you can use it as a banishment. Of course, don't use it as a banishment. It's a 7th level slot. Banishment's a 4th level spell. Just take Banishment if you like that spell. Don't use this spell for that. Use this spell to move your entire party to the place you need them when you need them to go there. And one action to cast, very useful. So now to our second best spell at 7th level, and we're back to spells that just win fights for us, because the spell that just wins fights for us at 7th level is Force Cage. Force Cage is a lot like Wall of Force, and if you remember my video where we talked about Wall of Force, you just cast it, you create this 10-foot radius, or this 10-foot diameter sphere, so you can trap a large or smaller creature, it can't get out, and so you've completely taken it out of the combat, you can deal with the minions, all blah 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 blah. But with Force Cage, you can now create a cage that's 20 foot by 20 foot by 20 foot, which means that you can fit even a gargantuan creature in there. So now we're into those really big, tough creatures. Here comes the Tarrasque, and you put it in a Force Cage. Here comes the dragon, you put it in a Force Cage, even when it's huge or gargantuan. And no saving throw. They can't get out by non-magical means. If they want to teleport, they have to make a saving throw just to be able to teleport out. They can't dispel it with dispel magic. So really difficult to get out of. And because it's a cage, what can happen too is, so you get the creature caught in the cage, and then if you get an effect like even something like a Call Lightning, and then you just back out and just let it go. And eventually the creature dies. You don't even have to fight it. So it's more than just divide and conquer. It's just conquer. Amazing, it's only second best. But the first best is so good. So that brings us to our best spell at 7th level, which is Simulacrum. Simulacrum creates an illusory duplicate of a humanoid or a beast. And that duplicate has half the hit points of the original. Comes without any equipment. But it gets all their spells and abilities. So you can create an illusory duplicate of yourself. And then it has all your spells that it can cast, all your abilities that you have. Now, once it uses them, it can't regain them. But just think about, we're at least 13th level at this point. And of course, this spell is going to be completely useful for you right up to 20th level. But at 13th level at this point, how many spell slots you have? Imagine just you now have another you right beside you that can cast, so you get 2 spells around, you get double the number of spells total. All this for a cost of 1,500 gold. That is such an amazing bargain to have double your power. Now, because you have half hit points with this Simulacrum, you have to be careful because it could die easily. So you want to plan your defenses for it. But if you're a spellcaster, which you are, then you can have it have the defensive spells and defensive tactics, and it has your intelligence, so it can use defensive tactics in combat. So it's completely survivable. And then you double your actions in combat. So I don't really have to explain why that is so amazing. Easy, number one. Even better than Force Cage. We're now at the point where these spells are just making you feel so powerful. It's a lot of fun to play and to be able to do this kind of thing. So definitely, if this spell becomes available to you, take it. You'll love it. So as we get into our overrated and underrated spells, I consider narrowing it to less than 3, just simply because our spell list is getting so small, right? We're at 7th level. We no longer have Paladin spells. We no longer have Ranger spells. And all the class spells, there's less of those too. So we get to the point where there's not a lot of spells that I think are overly overrated or overly underrated. Be aware, there just hasn't been as much data to make these calls. These are subjective calls, and if you disagree, I totally understand. So let's move into it. So let's get into our overrated spells. So my third pick for overrated spell at 7th level is Project Image. Now, Project Image creates an image of you. It's illusory, and you can see and hear through it. And then you can move it around, and that's about it. Now, you might think, couldn't I create an illusion of myself with a much lower level spell? Yes, you could. Couldn't I see in other places with something like an Arcane Eye using a 4th level slot? Yes, you can. So what's the great thing about this spell? I don't know. I don't know what's so great about it. In previous editions, Project Image could actually be used to cast spells through, and that had all kinds of tactical advantages. But even if you could with this spell, it still wouldn't be very good because it uses your concentration, which means those best spells aren't even available to you. And I just can't help but notice that a Trickery Cleric gets a very similar ability at level 2, right? And it doesn't even use a spell slot. And we're going to use a 7th level slot for it. Now, Project Image, those of you who've heard that this might have some kind of use in combat, out of combat, in scouting, it's easily duplicated by lower level spells. So it's not very good, and you should probably avoid it, and it's probably overrated. So let's move on to our second most overrated spell at 7th level. And in my choice for this spell is Finger of Death. I just recently read a guide where Finger of Death was compared to Disintegrate in a positive way. Now, I don't think Disintegrate is a good spell, and I don't think Finger of Death is a good spell. Finger of Death is a spell where you designate one creature, and it's going to take damage, necrotic damage, average about 55 points of damage. So on its own, just that, I already don't think this is a particularly good spell. Using a 7th level slot to get 55 points of damage against one creature using your action, I don't think that's a good investment at all. However, the creature gets a save, and it's Constitution, and if they make it, they take half. So now we're talking terrible damage, like 28, 27 points of damage if it makes it save. So if you consider the saving throw, on average, it's really doing in the 40s, maybe the low 40s or high 30s. Not a good investment for a 7th level slot. Against a single creature, consider that creatures at this challenge rating are going to be looking at hundreds of hit points. And that's just not enough damage to make it worthwhile for you to use a 7th level slot. You only get one of these. Now, I guess the big deal here is that if you kill the creature with the Finger of Death, it comes back as a zombie. Now, if a T-Rex comes back as a T-Rex zombie, that might be interesting and cool. But it certainly doesn't suggest that. What it suggests is it comes back as a Monster Manual zombie, which is kind of dumb for certain creatures that you kill with it. And no matter what creature you kill with it, it's terrible. I mean, zombie is like the creatures you were fighting at 1st level, and you get one of them using a 7th level slot, and crappy damage, and everything on top of that. Poor necromancers. Why were necromancers picked on so badly in 5th edition? I don't understand why just because it does necrotic damage, we're going to make it worse than everything else. but they did. Finger of Death should be avoided. So that brings us to number 1 most overrated spell at 7th level. This one I really do think is overrated, and that's Delayed Blast Fireball. Now, a lot of people love Delayed Blast Fireball. I love Fireball. I don't think Delayed Blast Fireball is nearly as good for its level as Fireball is for its level. Delayed Blast Fireball sends that little bead of energy that when it detonates, it's going to become your Fireball. And if you detonate it right away, it does 12d6 damage, which is not good for 7th level. The idea is that you concentrate and you maintain your concentration for up to a minute, and each round adds 1d6 to the damage. There's a number of reasons why I think this spell is overrated. I think there's an assumption that you're going to be able to do that 22d6 damage, but that is so circumstantial. It is so unlikely you're ever going to get 22d6 points of damage. Most of the time, what's going to end up happening is you're going to get a 12d6 fireball that uses your concentration, and that's awful, right? You can do more with the scaled fireball. If you're lucky, you might get a round or two, but there's all kinds of problems getting this spell. First off, if you're maintaining your concentration on it, so if the combat is ongoing, you don't want to be concentrating on this. Your concentration could be broken. Also, that fireball, if something grabs it and gets a dex save, it can throw it and move it. So then all the tactical advantages are gone. And never mind the fact that you don't know where to place it necessarily to begin with. You've got to avoid friendly fire. You've got to have your enemies in the right place at the right time. All these things, so incredibly difficult to manage, to get them all in the right place at the right time to get that big Delayed Blast Fireball damage. Most likely what's going to happen is you're going to shoot it, it's going to use your concentration, which means you're not concentrating on something else. You're going to do 12d6, maybe 13d6 damage with it. And it's essentially going to be a crappy fireball with a 7th level spell. So a lot of people love this spell. I don't love this spell, and I don't think I'd ever take it, and I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. Now that said, maybe you have a tactical way to use a Delayed Blast Fireball that I haven't considered. If so, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But until then, let's move on. So now let's talk about underrated spells. This one's hard. Are there secret gems that we don't know about at 7th level? It's a small list, and the spells that are good, we generally know are pretty good. There are some spells I think are maybe more obscure, that might be a little bit better than you think they are. Those are the kinds of spells I'm going to talk about. The first one I'm going to talk about is Conjure Celestial. There's not a lot of choices for the Conjure Celestial spell. It allows you to conjure a Celestial of challenge rating 4 or less. And then it gives the example of a Pegasus. Now, if you cast Conjure Celestial to get a Pegasus, you are wasting the spell. The obvious choice for Conjure Celestial is Coatl. Coatl has all kinds of useful spells and abilities that you can then take advantage of. So you use your 7th level slot to Conjure Celestial, and it's casting Scrying for you. It's casting Greater Restoration for you. It's using its True Sight to find things or detect delusions. It detects magic. It's detect thoughts. And then in combats, of course, it has other advantages too. It's not a great combatant, but it can certainly add some things. It has a decent poison and be decent in attack, a decent number of hit points. It has shield spell if it gets targeted. So it can even help you out that way as well. So you add all those things on, and there might be some hidden gems there that you didn't realize that you could get with a Conjure Celestial spell. So I'm going to say it's underrated. Is it underrated? So this brings us to our second most underrated spell. The second most underrated spell I'm just going to have a quick talk about is Etherealness. Etherealness is a spell that can turn your entire party ethereal. So the advantage to that is pretty obvious. You can bypass so many challenges. You need to get to somewhere. You want to take on the tough enemy while you're still at full strength. Etherealness is a way you can do that. It essentially can be kind of a teleport, taking you past all the terrible things and bringing you into the spot you need to be, except unlike a teleport, you don't need to know the location beforehand, which is usually the case in most adventures. So this is a great way to get past a lot of challenges. I I think with etherealness, people tend to quickly think about things like walking through walls that they maybe couldn't get through, and so they think of it as like an expensive pass wall spell or something like that. But it's so much more because of the number of creatures and the duration. And remember, when you're ethereal, you're invisible, and you can travel in any direction you want, and you can still perceive the regular world. So as a way for the entire party to scout out a dungeon or an adventure and then appear where they want to appear, when they want to appear there, take enemies by surprise, all those things. All kinds of tactical advantages here that maybe people haven't always considered. So I'm going to say this spell is underrated. So how about our number one most underrated spell? This spell is actually underrated for a very good reason, because when you read it quickly, it sounds awful. And that spell is Divine Word. Divine Word is a spell that takes a bonus action, and then at a 30-foot radius, creatures around you, if they have low numbers of hit points, they can be blinded or restrained or knocked out. But the hit point totals are so low, it's terrible. So you read this spell, and at first you read it and you think, ugh, this spell doesn't do anything good. But then you read the last line, and if a creature comes from another plane, like a celestial or a fiend or an elemental, the hit points don't matter. It's banished if it fails a saving throw. So this becomes like a mass banish. Now, I talked about banish being overrated, but I did say I like the spell. And it's a single target, save or do nothing. This is now mass targets. So you can be surrounded by demons, cast Divine Word, and kaboom, you get rid of most of them. That's amazing. And unlike Banish, you don't need to concentrate for the minute afterwards to make it stick. This one just, it takes effect and it's done. No concentration, so you can have it while you're maintaining some other great spell. So because of that last line, I think this spell does get seriously underrated. I underrated this spell myself first time I read it, until I read that bottom part, and then it's like, oh wow, what a thing to put in the small print, because this is really what the spell is all about. And so in that circumstance, just amazing. So that is my most underrated spell, and that's my entire list. So 7th level spells, we're getting into smaller and smaller and smaller. We're also getting near the end. So we'll be talking about 8th level spells here soon. Until then, I'm just going to sit back and relax. Let's have some fun, because D&D is for everyone. Thanks, guys. See you in a week.